Greetings, programs. This is Let's Code a Full 90, where we take the next hour and a half and dig into some source code, try to make our part of the world a little bit of a better place. Today we're working on the Wix toolset. I'm your host, Rob Menching, and we're going to pick up kind of where we left off. Let me just jump right into it. We don't need to be on this thing here. All right. We actually made some really good progress in episode 29. It was awesome. It was fantastic. I loved it. We checked off a whole bunch of things related to remote payloads. Got all the things committed, pushed up, made a lot of improvements there. Then we went off and fixed a couple doc bugs and a couple of little things around. And I left a couple things hanging of, there's a couple things that I didn't like while we were working on that I wanted to go investigate. But as I thought about it more, before we switched to that, I remember that there was an issue open still in this remote payload, bundle payload area. And that's this 5601. So I decided that since I had opened 6802 to ask questions about how 5601 should be considerations for that, you know what, let's go ahead and finish up what we were working on there. So what's the feature we're looking at here? This is an old feature. It's been around for quite a while where in this case, they have some static block of content. In this case, it was SQL 2014. But you can imagine some other thing that's very large. And right now, when referring to all these external things, you had to keep running all the builds so that the Wix toolset could get all the hashes or all the certificates and everything like that. So the ask was to be able to do a one-time capture of that entire remote payload and then just have it in the code. So, and that seems totally reasonable. And it's related to all the other remote payload stuff we were doing for certificate and hash verifications and all the interactions between those two things. And I asked some questions about this. If a exe package can have a payload, and if that exe, and not just exe packages, if any package that gets installed in a bundle can contain payloads, if the main payload, like in the case of an exe package, if that is not signed, but the content is signed, should we allow that? Does everything all have to be signed together? Or alternatively, if the exe package is signed and any of the other content is not signed, do we allow that? Well, we had a discussion about this in the last triage, and pretty clearly the second case is easy. You will have things where you have an exe package that's signed and like a text file that simply can't be signed. So we decided that yes, that case is definitely allowed. And in the case of the first, you know what, if a cab file is signed but the exe is not, and you said, hey, let's gather all the certificates, let's just let the code kind of go through. So we're going to go take a look and see how all of this can fit together, making sure that we keep in mind the certificate behavior and hash behavior as we go through, because we might find, you know, as we get into this, we might find some interesting bumps along the way. But the idea here from this issue is that, you know what, let's not do anything like to prevent or to forcibly prevent these sort of things. All right. Now I'm going to admit, I haven't really dug into this feature deeply, so we're going to have to go digging for a while. And I thought I could go off and do some research, or I could just have you guys come along the ride with me and kind of see, all right, if you want to get lost in the Wix toolset for a while, how do you go about making any progress? And so that's what we're going to do. Now, a lot of this also is, I'm kind of going, how much of this have we done already? How much of the feature here has been implemented in various parts? Because I've always had this in the back of my mind of getting this feature enabled as we've been doing all these other things. So I may have accidentally enabled a couple of things without realizing, or rather not trying to block them, and then hitting all these interesting issues. All right, so where are we at? This is the burn remote payload subcommand feature. If you remember, this is one of the things we renamed in the last thing because I kept getting confused of this with all the, it was called remote payload and I thought it was remote payload test. It's not. It is the test for the remote payload subcommand. So Wix burn remote payload and then gather all the information about all those things. And this is definitely going to be something that's going to help do that. Sean asked, did I get the latest develop? Yep, I did do that. I got the latest changes, Sean. I should be fully up to date. In fact, maybe if we have time, I'll show you the latest thing that I just added at the end, but we'll go from there. All right, so this is a case where we have, well, a bundle package that we went out, got a test XC, and then said there's a remote bundle. And we want to get all the payloads and their locations. All right, this isn't helping me. Let's go look instead at the bundle manifest fixture. So here I'm going to kind of look and see if I can find something that talks about the internals of Burn and see how it's storing all of its payloads. Yeah, so this one talks about payloads, populates with payload information. All right, this looks kind of interesting. So we may poke a look at this one. And yeah, let's go ahead, like this says payloads and Wix payload properties. Let's kind of take a look at the internals of what Burn is expecting in its manifest, because the Wix toolset goes through and takes your source code and compiles it all down into a final result that gets inserted into the bundle itself. So let's go ahead and look kind of at what all of that goo that gets put in there. So we'll run this build really quick, which will build a little simple bundle. And then we use this bundle extractor to extract all of the interesting parts out of it. And let's see, I think this has lots of pieces in it. Now there's now a number of manifests and I'm still a little fuzzy on all of them. Let's see, which is the one I want? That's the data, bundle extension data. I want the manifest, here we go, manifest document. And let's just take a look at the XML. Oh, that's ugly. Let's see. How do I want to do this? I don't really want to look at it like that. Let's see if the XML viewer will be better. Never been thrilled with this view either, but it's definitely better than the other one. Can I make this bigger? Yes, please. There we go. All right. So this is the stuff that the Burn engine itself is. Man, that is bright. Using dark mode everywhere. I need to turn on my backlights here. Blinding me here. All right. All right. So the Burn manifest, there's this thing at the UX, which is all about the UI parts that get shown. We don't want to do remote payloads for any of those. Here's a container, which is the attached container. So that's the cab that gets stuck on the end of the XE. So you can have one single XE with all of your stuff compressed inside. Here's the list of payloads that are just loose, but they have pieces on them, to say which container they're on or where they're found. And in this case, they're in this attached container and their packaging is embedded. So for remote payloads, clearly they have to be able to be downloaded or externally available. So then here's the XE package. And on it, it has a payload ref and a payload ref. And XE package ID, all these pieces. And I'm just going to guess that the first one is the XE that it runs. All right, so both of these are referring to the source file payload, which is right here. Cool. So these two XE packages end up sharing this source file payload. So it looks like we need to get all the payload refs hooked into here correctly for remote payloads and things like that. All right, let's see, can we find a remote payload case? Is this it? We have package information. Let's see. Custom package information, custom package description WXS. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of our source code and see if we can find any that are remote. This says it's a remote payload because it has a XE package payload defined for it. So normally when you define an XE package, you can just specify at the end here, the source file, and it will generate or it'll gather from all that all the payloads you need. Here, we are specifically specifying the XE package payload. And so it seems that we should be able to just add more payloads inside here that meet this requirement with a download URL, a name, a size, and a hash or a certificate and things like that. And that, if we look back, is what this is kind of laying out. Cool. So let's go look at the manifest for this remote one real quick. This one? Yes. Okay. We'll pin this guy just so I can find him easily. And we will run to here. That'll give us the results. And we're looking for the remote payload XE. Well, that's named nice and easy, so that should be easy to find. All right, let's go ahead and debug this one. There we go. Let's look at our extract result again. Open up the manifest document. The inner XML was fine before. We'll do XML visualizer again, and we'll make this bigger. All right, so we're looking for the remote payload XE. And here we are in the remote payload XE. And this is all essentially the same as the other XE that we're looking at. The remote doesn't matter. It's all build time. It's a matter of finding all the parts. And then here's the remote payload XE, which is one of these payloads up here, which specifies all of the parts about it, including its download URL and the fact that its packaging is external, so it can be found elsewhere. It can be brought along. All right. And it's up to the person that builds this bundle to make sure that these remote payloads are available at that download URL or whatnot. Okay, so it seems that if we just get the payloads in the right place, then maybe the rest of the system will kind of flow for us. Now, that's the XE package. All right, so I'm actually looking at the results. Okay, cool. No, sorry, I didn't want to build everything. Hit F6 instead of F5 there. Okay, so let's go look at the XE package processing. So we've looked at this in the compiler bundles before. We've been in here quite a bit, actually. Let's just, can I close? No. Visual Studio doesn't have close to the right. Kind of want that, but that's okay. All right. All right, so let's go see where the payload groups are brought in. Ooh, that's gonna be interesting. It's pulling the compiler. We'll want to look at. Let's go look at that one real quick. I'm guessing this is a payload group that's inside a fragment. Yeah, it's hard to read up here, but parse fragment element. Parse fragment element. That makes sense. So you can define payload groups out and about in fragments and things like that. All right, that's cool. I think we're more interested in the one where it's defined. Okay. This is the payload group that is inside a bundle element. All right. XE package payload. I was not expecting this. All right. Oh, an XE package can be inside a payload group. That makes sense. An XE package can be inside a chain. All right. Parse chain element. Right, so this parse chain element is the same sort of one we're looking at here. Oh no, this is payload group. Oh, okay, great. I wasn't even looking, or package group, sorry. Package group, okay. Cool, so we can get here either way. In any case, it's the XE package that is the parent, and I think it's all the children underneath. Okay, great. XE package payload. All right, now parse package group, XE package. This is in the package group element. Parse XE package is parsed in two different places. One as part of a chain element when it's called an XE package. I don't quite have enough screen in the state to put both of these up here. There it is, this XE package in the chain element. And here it is in the payload group. Yeah, in the pack. I don't keep saying payload group. In the package group. Okay, great. And they're kind of the same. Let's look at how they're different. And this is, yeah, okay. So they're basically the same. One's just the ref and not. Okay. Let's go back. And the parent is package group. Wrong one. I want the first one. And here, the package group. All right, it's package group. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the parents of these things because I just want to make sure that we're able to know when we can nest these payloads under it. So when there's an XE package payload, let's go look for that inside the chain package, right? So this is the generic function that parses all of these different kinds of children, because they're more similar than they are different, is probably the way to say it. And we were in here before when we were doing all the work around remote payloads, because there's a tie between the two of them where certain attributes appear on the XE package payload and some appear on the parent on the XE package. All right, so here we can see the package type, which is XE package in our case that we've been looking at so far, and there's the package payload. And here then is up front because it affects ID generation. So we go ahead and grab the one that we expect, the XE package, and if we find more than one, we say, hey, you can't have more than one. All right, that's great. And we grab hit first, as this comment says, because it gets the ID from there. Okay, that's fine. Now that the package ID is known, we could parse the extension attributes. Now we're not worried about them. And the XE can have, all right, different detection types. I'm now looking at the children. Right. ARP entry slip payload. Cool. So we can already specify additional payloads inside here normally, which makes sense, right? Because in an XE package, there's no information about in burn to say anything about where or what files you need. If you just said, hey, I have an XE that I want burn to install, it's like, great, I will install that XE. And you're like, oh wait, that XE has these 10 other files. There's nothing in an XE that tells you that it has 10 other support files that are needed to install. MSIs, of course, you can crack an MSI and look and say, oh, this MSI requires all these other files and grab those and so on and so forth. But XEs in this particular case are not. So they already allowing you to manually list payloads. Okay, great. So the trick now is, can we teach payloads, or are they already taught this trick, to be remote? Let's go ahead and take a look. Ooh, there's payload group ref. That's basically saying, hey, go and get all of these payloads in a ref. All right, I have to, or somewhere else all of these are defined. Okay, so let's look at the payload. I don't think we're gonna see anything too surprising in here. Yeah, all the different pieces you can have, the source file, you can override the name, you can specify whether it's compressed or not, you can provide a download URL, and then it creates that payload and it assigns it to its parent. All right, so interestingly, here's all of our named payloads, XE package, payload bundle package, and all of these are just basically say, hey, was this allowed underneath this parent element? And if not, then throw an error, but we already processed it because you remember we searched for it up front. Okay, so there's that. I think this is where we're going to live for the most part, is just allowing remote payloads. So now, if we look at this payload element, and we look at the create payload symbol, right, there's all these pieces of information on it. oh, look, it already has the ability to specify the certificate public key, the thumbprint, the hash, and all those things on it, which is good. Interesting. The unresolved source. Whether it's compressed and its download URL. So it seems that we should have all the information we need to get to here with these set. And this is in the compiler payload. Right. So this is a little bit of a departure from the way the compiler works in most cases, and I always have to remember this, that there's this helper object that comes in because there's a lot of post validation that goes in to it. And if we look, there's all these parts that have to be validated and stuck together and handle is remote allowed and all that, which is where we're going to live in the next little bit, I think, of putting all this together. You can see how complex this is. And so the decision was to pull this out so that we could do it. And I always have to remember that this is not just a function in the compiler. This is a separate class that we jump out to. All right. That's note to myself, create payload symbol. And then we go down through here and then we tie this payload in with everything else. Okay, so this is good because it seems like it should have all the information we need on it to make it remote. All we have to do is make sure we allow that. All right, let's go back. Create. Yeah, see, and there's several places that we create payloads because they're generic. They're not generic. They're used in several different places. Okay, back to where we were. Looking at where the payload is created. Okay. So here on the payload element, we do not parse the certificate information. So while the compiler payload allows us or has support for handling all those different pieces, the compiler does not actually process them if you put them on a payload element. Which means that we need to add to the compiler the support for specifying those attributes. All right, so what did we do? We started at the top, went around, looked at some random source code, some WXS code to test, kind of see, hey, what do we need to do to get in here? And then looked at the burn manifest. So I kind of looked at one end of the source code, the WXS source code, and what it looked like to shape this. And then we looked at the manifest on the other side of what it needed to look like when it's going to be inside burn. Great. And then said, okay, in between the two, found the compiler payload object, which is the thing that spins all this together and creates the actual symbols in the compiler that allows the data to flow to the backend where it'll end up in that manifest that we looked at. Okay, that all looked great. That had all the data we needed, which makes sense because it supports remote payloads for XEs. What it doesn't support is loose or other support remote payloads. So now we look here at the actual parse in the payload element and we can see, oh yeah, this does not support specifying the hash, for example. It does allow specifying the download URL, that's good, but it doesn't allow specifying the hash and it doesn't allow specifying the certificate information. And if we look here at this little example code here, we could see, oh, this payload, for example, would have the certificate information specified, or this payload would have the hash specified. We need to allow payloads to have that. And then we need to check, which is what a lot of the compiler payload does, check to make sure that those attributes are actually allowed when this payload is specified, because we don't want to allow you to have, well, let's see. That's actually, I was going to say, we don't want to allow remote payloads anywhere in the system. But now that I say that, what if, let's see, let's just go, I was going to look for my example code here. Okay, so this is a remote payload, XE. Bring it down here a little bit so we can see it. And you can tell here, because of the XE package, and it has no source file involved. Where if we compare this to this guy up here, this guy has a source file, it's right here. Okay, so allowing a payload, just a payload, no description, to have a hash, doesn't have a product name, does have a size, does not have a version, it'll need a name, fake.text, I don't know, text, and then it will need a download URL, whatever. Fake.text. This download URL is very, very fake. All right, so this basically would allow this this payload to be a text file that is supported with this guy. All right, and today, as we saw in the compiler code, the hash, the size, the hash and the size both, hash and the size are not allowed right here. In fact, if we look over here in our test now, this is great. Ncrunch has told me, hey, you have a hash and a size on the payload and neither of those attributes are supported. All right, great, awesome. That is correct. They are not supported, so a lot of this will be enabling that. Okay, great. So where was I going with my digression? I was going with my digression here. What should we allow you to have some, like, some file, and this will be really big file, doesn't matter, as a remote payload here. This would say that this exe package can find this burn exe, and it will always get the latest burn exe. It's burn, fine. It's called burn.exe. It's just a name. It's not actually burn. This is a strange little test, but it's fine. So it has a file called burn.exe that needs this really big dat file. Is there any reason we shouldn't let you add a remote payload here? Because essentially what you're saying is that this file changes regularly, and it does stuff, and it expects this file, this really big dat file, at this URL over here. And it's really big, but it never changes, or it changes, and it just doesn't change very often. So what if I could take the payload and just stick it in there? Everything should work the same as in the case of the remote payload exe package, which is cool. I mean, it's identical. It just allows you to say, I need this file for this package, and that file isn't here or isn't available in the build process. Probably should have clarified this at the beginning. Remote payload, when we say the word remote payload, that doesn't mean that it's on a network share or on a URL or whatever necessarily. The main thing it says about remote payload is that it is not available at build time. At build time, if you have availability of the file, for example, in this case, we're stuck at calc.exe, which is very interesting, then the tool set can, during the build process, gather all this information from these exes, from this file, its hash, all that stuff, and put it in here. And that's great if the file's local. But like the feature request said, we have a very large set of files that we don't want to have to get processed every build. They don't change, they're big, so let me just put them somewhere else. So that's the remote part of remote payload. They're not available in your build process. And then somehow, which means you need to capture the data about them enough for Burn to be able to handle them, which is what all these attributes are that we're talking about here. So you get that into your source code. Now we don't need those files at build time, but you have to make sure they stay in sync, because now they're not being validated at build time, but that's the responsibility you take when you ever use remote payloads. And then when you ship the bundle, you have to make sure that those remote payloads are put in the location where Burn is going to expect them. In this case, on this download URL, or you could put them, into the appropriate place in the media when it gets laid out next to the exe, whatever. Again, you're responsible for dealing with the remote payloads. So it's not necessarily remote behind a URL, although that's a very common case. It's just remote as in not available at build time. That would have been another way of saying this. This is not available at build time payload. It's essentially, that's really what we're talking about when we talk about remote payloads. So the more I talk about it, the less I see any reason to block or to require remote payloads to be only within remote XCs. You could always just come in and say, hey, give me the remote payload. This is a remote payload. I think that also will make the compiler easier, because here we won't have to care what kind of parent element we're in. You can always just say, hey, here's a remote payload. Here's a payload. I chose not to make it available at build time. Here's all the information you need. And you can use that for anything that accepts payload elements. I think that makes a lot of sense too. All right, so I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I mentioned in the Bootstrap application payloads must be available at build time. Right, that's true. So Sean points out that the Bootstrap application, which also uses payloads, those have to be available at build time because they get inserted into a special place in the bundle that can then be made available when the UI is displayed. Those, we do not have a mechanism where we can say, hey, please wait, user, while we download the UI to a location so that we can then display it for a bundle. That is not allowed. So the code will have to, if this parse payload element ends up underneath, 5 references. It probably ends up in the Bootstrap application. So we'll have to make sure that when this is referenced under a Bootstrap application, that it does not allow things to be remote payloads. That is very true. So the next thing is calculate and verify fields, which I think is here. That's finish. Does finish do that? Where is this called? Not as helpful. Yeah, okay. There's finish compiling package. Finish compiling payload. Let's look at finish compiling payload. There it is. Calculate and verify fields. Great. Oh, it's private. Oh, that's so weird. The private function is above the public ones. That's not normal. All right, that threw me. Okay, anyway. We're not going to move it right now. Maybe later. Okay, so is remote allowed is set here as a public boolean. So that's kind of a high level bit. So we could set, so if we go back and think about what I just said, the remote payloads are always allowed to be a remote payload when under packages, because hey, you can have it somewhere else in your build, but not under Bootstrap application data like Sean said. So this will be an important boolean for us to set appropriately. Cool. And let's go back and look at the compiler again. This is finish compiling bundle. So compiler payload. When you create it, you give it a core, source lines, number of elements. All right, and I want, let's see, remote allowed. Yep. So remote allowed is not set. Uh-oh. Did I lose my place? I lost my place. Payload. Oh, here we go. Parse package payload. No, that's package payload. Here's package payload, and notice it does allow remote in the case of bundles, XCs, and MSUs. That makes sense. MSIs have too much information on them, so we don't allow them to be, MSPs and MSIs do not have too much information, so we don't allow them to be remote. But that doesn't mean the payloads can't, because they're simple. All right, where was my parse payload? Parse payload element, great. Okay, so we can control, this does not set that attribute today, or the field property. Does not set that property today. So we will want to set that. Okay, great. And then this says if there is not a public key or a hash, right? Okay, so this then, you need a public key and thumbprint or the hash for it to be remote, because that's the way that we validate the file. That's an important piece of information. All right. So if it has a source file, attribute, it's not remote. We know where the file is, we'll reference it in the build, we're done. Okay, and then we do a little extra work on the source file. So if we do not have a source file and is remote, right? So we cannot be remote, and it's required, and it's not remote, then we spit out appropriate error message based off of that. Okay, that's great. So that's handling that case. Otherwise, if remote is allowed, then let's see, is this a local file? If it has a source file, or is not empty. Yeah, it has a source file. We don't care about that case. Otherwise, we come in here. It must have a download URL. It must have a name. It's going to do all the certificate public thumbprint checks for us. It's going to then also validate the hash if it needs to do that. It will then do the right thing around compression, which is remote payloads must not be compressed, because if they're not available during the build process, we can't compress them into the containers that we're going to compress. So, duh. All right, so this is going to do all the checks we need. All we need to do is set compiler is remote allowed, and for a lack of better name right now, is remote allowed. Okay. So let's add this as a Boolean, is remote allowed. Okay, so then we're gonna break everybody that calls this, which is gonna be a fantastic way in. So then the next thing we need to do is allow payloads to have all of those attributes that we're missing, which include the hash. Let's see, these are alphabetical, right? No, download URLs last, whatever. Okay. Hash, parse, hash, thank you. Let me go get the names. I want to get the names correct. I'm gonna set a breakpoint here, or a jump. I have a jump point there. Okay. Certificate public key. I want to get these two cases handled. Certificate thumbprint and certificate public key. Parse certificate public key. Certificate thumbprint. There we go. Now the attribute names match, and we parse those. Hash and now we need a size. Right? Size is a good thing. Yes. Source file, parse version. We're not parsing version. We're not parsing product name. We do have name. I think we have ID. Well, we're not going to add ID. Description, compressed, ID from prefix. These are private. This is so strange with all these private makes it private. Okay, anyway. Okay, so we can parse all those things. Okay, so now we can now parse these things. Now, this test that I have failing by setting the hash and the size should now at least pass that part as soon as we get it compiling again, because I added a parameter here. And oh, thank you. Yes. Indicates if the payload element can be remote or not. Okay. That takes care of that little squiggly. I don't know. We got into a kick of labeling all these a long time ago, and I don't know how much value it adds in the end. All right, so now let's go look at all the places that parse payload element can be used. We're going to see all the different places payloads happen, and see whether they could be remote or not. So this is parse payload element. Wait, huh? This is in the function parse payload element. Parse payload element can have payloads? Wait, that doesn't sound right. Where am I? I'm in parse chain package. Yes, that makes more sense. Why does this little dropdown say parse payload element? That's not where I'm at all. Oh, maybe, my bad. I was still up there because I didn't click here. There, now it says parse chain package. Okay. I know that's really small, probably in the stream, but parse chain package, that's what we expect. And yes, this is the chain packages. This is definitely one of the cases we want where we want to say is remote allowed is true. All right, so that's 1 out of 5, right? So that's 1 of 5. Here, we're in parse payload group element. And payloads by themselves, I think, can be remote at any time. I think that's fine. What we're going to find is there's going to be a case when payloads are not just floating by themselves. All right, here in a bundle extension element. Ooh, I don't know. Bundle extensions run at runtime. These are like BAs, right, Sean? I haven't done a bundle extension, so I think this is false, right? These payloads need to be available and compressed inside burn. Is that right? Hoping Sean can jump in because that was one of his features in Wix 4 that came about. Yep, same as Bootstrap application. That was my guess. All right, cool. Here is the Bootstrapper application ref, which is basically a Bootstrap application. And you can also tell because of the UX container. By the way, in case you're ever inside the compiler and wondering what's going on, UX is the old name for BA. It was an attempt to say this is the user experience. This is both the UI and all the things that go behind the UI when you're writing a bundle. Somewhere along the line, pretty late actually in the initial implementation of Burn, the UX name, I kept trying to explain it to people and it kept not sticking. They would not understand it. So I finally said, let's call it a Bootstrapper application. And they're like, all right, which at least then they can say, what's that? I'm like, that's the application. The UI is an entire application that runs inside the Burn engine. And that seemed to work better when people had to do it. Certainly better than UX. But internally, you'll still see things refer to UX, even though the UX container name, if we go look at it real quick, oh, no, it's still Wix UX container. I thought we changed it to BA, but we didn't. So still hanging ons of that. Okay, so this is a Bootstrapper application ref, a way of adding a bunch of content to a Bootstrapper application. Ooh. Parse payload group ref. This got trickier. So here, have to think through this. So here you have a BA that has a payload group. We need to know if that payload group ends up inside of a Bootstrap application. Oh, that's icky. That's unfortunate. That means I need to go back and look at this, because this has... All right, I have to go back and look at that one. Oh, that's a bummer. That's going to make things much more complicated. Parse Bootstrap application. Okay, so we know that remote allowed is not true here. Okay, so I think that gets everything building again, and we should now see this. I was going to say this test pass. It's not going to pass. It's going to fail in a different way. Duplicate symbol Wix bundle payload found. This typically means that an ID is duplicated. Okay. Where do I want to go? I'm going to leave that for a second. I want to think through this payload group ref problem. So what does it look like a little bit? We're going to blow this up a bit here. Payload group ref ID equals X. All right. So here, this is going to take all the payloads that are in this group wherever it's defined. Let's just come down here. And we could put this payload group here real quick and just so there. Now we have this payload group. Right, and now, for example, we could take this payload out of here and put it in here. And this works fine because this payload ends up inside this payload group and everything's all cool. That's fine. But if we found the bundle for this thing, oh, we don't have the bundle for this, but if we look at a bundle, and we add a payload group there, right? Yeah. And we did this. Then this payload group has a remote payload in it. And we said that Bootstrap applications cannot have remote payloads because we will not download at the UI time and do that. Huh. This is a not uncommon problem that we run into in Wix whenever we allow a ref out to something else and we have context from its parent. All right, let's go look at payload group and let's see if it is what I think it is. Parse payload. If I drop this down, what do you show me? You show me everything in this file? Nope, everything in the world. That's not what I want. Parse payload group. Ref will probably do for now. Payload group ref. Parse for extension elements. Create group and ordering rows. Yeah, parse for extension elements. I'm blind. Where is the part that parses? Oh, this is the ref, of course. I was looking for where are the child payload elements under the payload group ref, which of course doesn't make sense. We don't allow you to put payloads underneath this ref. The ref is a reference to a payload group, so I don't want the parse payload group ref element. I want the parse payload group element, right? So that was a group ref, fine. So let's just go to parse payload group element. There we go. This will have the child. There we go. There's the parse payload. And I think I said this aloud is true, right? Yep. So the challenge here is that we're in a group and we don't know where this group is going to be used. So we don't know when parsing this payload element, given this group, whether it's going to end up inside a Bootstrap application or it's going to end up inside of an exe package or some other thing. And that creates, this is really not true. It depends on where this payload group ends up being used, which is not something we can check in the compiler at all. So the easy way out is to say false, is to say that you can't do a payload group, or you can do the payload group exe package, that's fine, but all your payloads are going to have to be local because we're not going to allow remote payloads inside payload groups. And we're not going to allow payload groups inside payloads we're not going to allow remote payloads inside payload groups because we don't have the logic in place to go figure that out. Or we can go try to plumb this feature all the way through to, I guess, the back end. Yep, the back end would have to do it to say, hey, this payload says it's or has the information on it to be a remote payload. I know now, because the backend has everything stuck together, it knows how everything's going to be put together. I know now that this remote payload, this is not allowed to be a remote payload here. Which is definitely doable. It would allow you to have payload groups with remote payloads in. That's essentially the feature, is allow payload groups to have remote payloads. which would be the complete solution. I think that would be, yes, then it can do the right thing. However, knowing the way that this usually gets used, and we're going to see this in the remote payload subcommand, there's a lot of information here that you have to generate. So if you always put the payload underneath the exe package and you list them all, like, because I mean, really what you're generally going to do is generate this exe package and all of its remote payloads. It's not something you're going to maintain by hand usually. And payload group would be nice if you had like a couple exes that shared a bunch of things. But I'm wondering if we can get away with it in Wix 4 of doing the simple case, which is definitely I'm going to guess the 80% case, and not go all the way to the back end and validate it. Essentially, say that this is false. Because this is false, we're not going to allow payload groups to have remote payloads. And then I'd have to open a new, I would want to open a new issue to track the more complete solution if we ever wanted to do that based off feedback. To solve the problem, what would we do? We would have to allow the payload group, this would have to be true here, which would potentially allow remote payloads through, and then we would catch them. So that basically this would be true. All right, we're gonna leave this here. We can get everything else done with this being false correctly and handle what I think is the 80% case. And then I can come back to this to do. All right, so this is consider supporting remote payloads in payload groups. If this is allowed, then the backend will need to ensure that Bootstrapper application and bundle, or what are they called? Bundle extensions? I forgot. Is it Bootstrapper extension or bundle extension? I think it's a bundle extension elements cannot be assigned, cannot contain a remote payload. All right, I think that's it. Now this is bugging me, which is it's bundle extension, right? Where can all those show up? Bundle extension. That's, oh yeah, that's not what I thought it was. The bundle extension. Yep. All right, cool. Cool. All right. That's what I wanted. Bundle extensions. Back. Where was I? One more. Bundle extension. A little bit farther. There we go. Okay. So we'll come back to this. I will write an item down to consider this. Let's go and get the rest of this working. Interestingly, yeah, all right, we gotta go fix some things. I have broken things quite a bit. Okay, undo all of this. Where is the other one? All right, now this one, we're not gonna allow this either. I should start creating another test probably pretty rapidly here. Okay, let's see. Great, I want to see this failing. Now this is saying real quick. Duplicate symbol, Wix bundle payload, yada 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 found. This typically means that an ID is duplicated. Where is that happening? Okay, well, let's go through and figure out where the duplicate is. This is going to be a linker problem. All right, let's go look at where we generate the payloads. It's going to be a duplicate hash. It's that simple. That would be pretty easy, wouldn't it? Put 4. Does that get the 2 hashes passed? Nope. Same thing. We're not generating the ID properly here, which is fine. I didn't necessarily expect this to work the first time. This is the kind of things that we're going to go debug. So parse payload element. Yes, this is where we want to be. Let's go and do that. Now they're going to hit a bunch of these, but that's okay. That's the purpose. Okay, parse payload element. Node, what are you going to show me? Payload hash. Oh, this is our first one. Really big debt. Great. Is remote allowed? Should be true? Yes, it's true. Great. So we're going to come through here. We're going to parse the hash, the size, the name, download URL, and we're done. And we're then going to come through here, validate all this. Wait, this source file is null. Okay. Oh, yes, if it is null, read it properly and is not remote. Right. Great. Now, it is null and we are not remote. Is remote allowed? Yes. Is it local? No, it's not local. All right. Do we have a download URL? Yes, we do. Do we have a name? Yes, we do. Good. Do we have a public key? No, we do not. All right. We have a hash and the size has a value. Great. So we have made this the happy and it is not compressed. So, or at least we didn't say what it was, so it's not. Then we generate an ID from this prefix. Okay, great. How is the generate ID? And this is our problem. If ID is null, it is, then let's create one from, the source file. Well, that's not going to work now, is it? Interesting that that's the ID we use, the source file. The source file. That's not what I would have expected us to use, but because the source file is kind of like user data. Just a second, let me get a drink. Like you could change the source file in a lot of different ways. I guess it's just the ID, and the ID in a bundle for a payload probably doesn't matter a lot. It's like a very local identifier. It's a very local identifier. All right, so if we don't have a source file, then return string.empty, which is another interesting thing. That's interesting. It's a fallback. The other users of the class have other methods before using this one. So that will generate from the file name. Okay, that makes sense. Otherwise, create an identifier for a file name from the source file. Okay. Why is this one different? So here we are in Bootstrap application DLL element. Bootstrapper application. Package payload versus just a payload. I wonder why this one doesn't use the name as well. Create an identifier from the file name. From the file name alone. Yeah. The thing is that that's not going to be very unique either. because you could have two payloads with the same name. File name? Yeah, same file name. Interesting. Yeah. This create identifier from file name for this source file. That seems sketchy though. Because how does that work in all cases? In cases where there are multiple. All right, let's see. How do I make this happen? I have to have the same payload. All right, let's see if I can make this. I'm just kind of like, let's just kind of hack this a little bit. And we're going to take out my remote payload for a second. Remote payload. And I want to give it a normal payload. Let's see if I can do that. What's something else interesting? So I should be able to give it a source file equals. Let's just give it this file itself. Copy full path. There we go. That's a really long path. And a download URL, that's fine. Doesn't really matter what the download URL is. And let's give this payload the same file. Okay. There we go. That makes sense, because they both end up coming through here, I think. Let's go ahead and debug here real quick. So that's burn.exe, we don't care about that one. Yep, go, go, go. Now there's calc, we don't care about that one. Oh, we died sooner than I thought we would. Let's see, where are we at now? Okay. We didn't get to the case. Oh, we didn't get to the case I was talking about because it's not this one. Duh. It's this one that we're hitting. There we go. Let's try that again. Oh, so this is the whole source file. This is just the file name. Okay. How do I get to this one? I have to generate it from the package payload. So this one then means I can't have the same. Let's see, I'm kind of trying to work my way through all the cases where these are problems. So this one, says two exes can't have the same name. Okay, let's try. So I should be able to recreate. Let me see if I can create this case. Yeah, right? So I should be able to put this thing in here. I mean, this is goofy, but what I'm essentially saying is I have this file and I have another remote payload. Oh, but it's going to use the name. No, this is fine. So I should be able to do this because this comes from a download URL and this will get cached to a different location. This is a little bit contrived. The theory here is that I have the same exe. Do I have the same name now? All right. It doesn't look like it's failing the way I thought it would, which is good. Just curious what I'm missing. So we got past the build. All right, cool. Let's see what I'm missing then from here. Now we're doing a little understanding, although this is an exe package payload. Let's see where we end up. Maybe this is all fine. So generate ID. Let's look at both of these. Yeah, let's just look at both of these. And let's just see. There aren't that many files here. All right, so this source file is null. So you're one of the, oh, the source file is null here. but the name is, all right, custom package description. Great. So this is the first one. So this comes in, oh, ID, oh, but the ID is not null. Probably because it has an ID. Aha! That's the way around this problem. If you have two XCs with the same name and they collide, you give them an ID. There we go. Okay. All right, so if for some reason you had two XCs, or honestly, it could be an XC, it could be any two packages or whatever, and they had the same name, you'd get a collision on the generate ID, and the answer would be specify the ID instead. Yeah. Otherwise, what are we doing? We have to generate the ID from pieces of information that we have. That would, what is the thing that would most likely make them different? See, this is a really contrived case also, because if you built this, normally you'd expect this file to be in the same. Yeah, this is, okay. Maybe I'm not as worried about this. Payloads though, you could get into a case where you have the same payload a couple times. They're a little bit more annoying that these two are being duplicated. Right? Let's go back. Compiler payload. Let's go look at this one. Debug. Oh, yep, please do that. And what are we looking at? We are looking at, the name is null, the source file is that one. Okay, great. And we do not have an ID, so we generate one from the source file. Right, and that collides. Got it, right. But in this case, these are the same. The exact same file. There's no way out of this problem. Yeah, okay. The non-perfect ID generation. All I'm doing now is kind of exploring, going, all right, so what kind of experience can we give people, and can we always generate the ID? Because one of the things we have been trying to do is make it so you can generate, that we can generate ID, so that ID goes away except when you want to refer to something. Then that's the only time you actually need to think about the ID. So in the case of XCs, or payloads, with no source file, they're a little bit different because they're missing it. Could include the parent's ID. It's true, we could. Do we have the parent ID in here today? We don't today. That's okay. I mean, we could add it. Do we always have the parent ID? I guess the parent ID sometimes would be a payload group, which would be fine, because then you'd be unique within that payload group. But then, yeah, that would be fine. Yeah, we could include the parent ID in this. I'm also thinking that for the case of payloads, I'm wondering why we don't always use the generate ID from file name first. Maybe it's more likely that from the file name. Yeah, you could end up with a lot of payloads. And if we use just their file name, that's not a lot of content. Right. So here, if we have the source file, that's something. But the question is, what should we pass here instead of string.empty? Because all of our payloads are going to be that. We could use name. That would be interesting. Create identifier from file name. Does that do a 2-upper on it? Common get identifier for file name. Woohoo, we're going deep. Oh, look at all that. Oh, this tries to get a friendly name for it, right? Forgot about that. Yeah. Right. Tries to get a nice clean identifier. All right, so generate ID from file name. I wonder if we should continue doing that. Okay, so this is package payloads. All right, so I kind of see now package payloads are a bit more, or there's fewer of them. They're more important. So generating the ID from the file name kind of makes sense. So in this case, this exe package's ID is burn.exe, which is kind of a nice default. Well, burn_exe, I think. Oh no, dots are allowed in IDs? I forget. Could go look. I don't care that much. So that's interesting. For payloads, yeah, we probably do want to generate them more, which is why this makes sense. Yeah. So, however, we could generate them from the name, the source file to start with, the name second. That's probably the way to go. It's definitely better than string.empty. And in the past, we would never get here because I to upper end variant, please. And then string.empty is our ultimate fallback. We could fall back to hash instead, though. That would be a possibility as well. Right, so we're still getting a collision here. That's what this red is saying, because these, I put the same file. Yeah, this essentially, it's like this payload is shared between these two exe packages, which makes sense. So here, the idea of passing down the parent ID is kind of interesting. Let's see if we did that. Create identifier, and this can take multiple strings, right? Yes, it can. What happens when we call create identifier, yep, with null arguments? We just join them all together. So I'm wondering what if we did this instead? If we just join these all together, no big deal, it's .hash to upper and variant. Oh, to upper 2. What if we took all three of those parts, the parent ID and all three of those parts, and hash them together? Shoot, from prefix. Well, let's see here. Let's see how much work is it for us to pass the parent ID into it? There's only 4 calls of this in the end anyway. Let's see how this looks. Yeah, let's see how this goes. All right, now we've broken things. Okay, of course. We don't know the payload ID here. Oh, this is package payload. Do we know the package payload? Yeah, okay, parse package. Well, we should know the default ID. Null and compiler payload ID. We're not passing the package payload ID, parent ID down, I guess. Let's see, is that true? Compiler payload ID. Right. I want the parent ID. So I'd have to pass that down. This is getting a little uglier. Let's see. Didn't get lucky here. Where am I? I'm in Bootstrapper application. The Bootstrapper application parent ID is always the UX container name. Where is that? That's okay. Let's just see how bad this turns out. Where are we at now? This is bundle extension. This is again the container, the US container. I have the parent ID here, I hope. Don't know if this can be null. Are there any cases where the parent ID is null? No. Always looks like there's an ID. That's good. That just leaves us with this one. Where? Yeah, so that's his default ID. What if I add the parent ID? It might be null. There are things. It might be. I'll have to go look. Let's see. So I broke two more things here. Now that gives me, what is the invalid ID? Is it string.empty? Yeah. Oh, no, it's string null. Okay, that's fine. Let's see. All right, package payload. I want this, where did I put it? I put it here. ID. Oh, it does allow it to be null. Really should go through and add all of the null annotations to Wix. Ha ha ha. That'll only take forever. Let's see. And where are we at here? Here we should know the parent ID. Yep, okay, good. Parent ID. This is kind of a mess, so I just kind of want to see how it ends up holding together in the end. Whoa. Our test passed. Something else fails, probably because we changed the IDs. Yeah, so we've changed the hashes so all the IDs are busted elsewhere, which is fine. Let's look at this one, and then let's look at our manifest. Great, let's debug this and see what we're trying to see. Parse payload element. Yeah, I just want to let this go for a little bit. Parent ID is burn.x, that's fine. Source file, name, hash, okay. Don't care about that one. Here's this one. And this time, parent ID is remote payload, so this will be null. Oh, wait, source file is not null? Oh, right, because I put a normal one in and then hash is null. Okay, need to go change it back to remote payload. Parent ID is UX container. Okay, now we're just dealing with all the other crazy things that are out there. Yes, all right. Now, can look at the extract result, and let's look at our manifest document real quick. Yes. All right, so what are we looking for? We're looking for our additional payloads. Custom package WXS. A0 custom package WXS. This file's in there twice. It's interesting. I guess that's what we get. And we're going to rely on smart cabbing to figure out that they're the same, I guess. That's not a new problem. All right. This is embedded though. All this is embedded. What? This didn't do. Although, what did this do? I think I have messed up my test case that is no longer really testing things that I wanted to test. Let's see. Right. I don't want to test this case. This was testing my naming issue that I thought I had. Well, that we had. I want this one. This one. I want an actual remote payload. And well, that's fine. 4 on there is fine. Okay. Now, does this pass? Still passes. Good. All right. Let's go debug this. I'm just going to blast through these until we get to my other final breakpoint. I don't know if I need these breakpoints. There we go. Now let's look at the extractor result. All we did in that last verification was show that that we could add payloads to an XC package, which we already knew the compiler supported. This is all about adding remote payloads that are not there. All right, so here's a remote payload XC that has this pay.v, okay, which is payv source XC file path hash size external. Boom. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's that. Source path, file path. Yep. Yep. And there's our 4, our file size external. All right. So that got them in there. That is a remote payload. That is part of this XC package. This is a remote payload. That is part of this XC package. Let's go ahead and add this guy here. Let's duplicate that one real quick. And this will work because we added the parent ID to it. And oh, nope, it did not work. Has a duplicate name. The external payload has a duplicate name. When bundling or laying out the bundle, the file will get overwritten. That is true. Layout. I didn't get layout right. I knew there was a case. Yes, 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 yes. So if you were to do a layout, which would download all the external files and lay them out, then these two guys, this fake.txt would end up colliding or end up overwriting itself there. Now this is a nicer error message than the one that says, hey, you have an ID collision between these two things. Which also says that the name really might be enough because of the remote, because of the layout folder. Yeah. Right. And if you don't have a name, okay, I'm seeing why this code works okay here. If you have a name, we use that. If you don't have a name, then we use the source. But we only use the file name for that. Okay. Again, all right. Again, this generate ID from file name is nice in the case of the package payloads because generally they're going to be unique, and having an ID be a guessable thing has some value. Got it. Given how we're trying to generate more things and say if you want to specify, if you want to refer to an ID, you probably need to specify it. Maybe we don't. I don't know. This is the way it was done in 3. All right, anyway, so I see why this one has the extra handling, and then we do this payload and we calculate verify fields right. And so then we can stick all these parts together. Either you'll have the source file name or you'll have the name. I don't know that I need the hash in there because you're only gonna have the hash when you have the name. And if the name of two different things collide, you're going to get that error message later. So I don't know if the hash adds a lot to our mix there. And I said name is required. I'm going to go back up here and double check that that is true. Yes, so download URL and name are required in the case of remote. Okay, that's good. So one of these two is going to be set, which means maybe we don't need to pass the null. We can just do that instead. So now there's only going to be, it's like, give me the source file or the name, put it in the second spot, call it good. That's probably better instead of always sticking a null in the mix. Yeah. And the parent ID is that. Is specified to minimize the chances of collisions. And we pass the parent ID here. Yeah, that's fine. When can you have a package payload that doesn't have a source file or a name? A name attribute or a source file attribute. You can't get through here, can you? Can you get through this gauntlet? You can't get through this gauntlet and not be in an error case, I think. I mean, that's what I just said here too, is that we're always gonna have a source file or a name. I wonder if this ever happens. Actually it does. Okay, I could, I'm using the same one. Let's see, we're gonna do this real quick. Just because this is a random end crunch trick I can do. Prefix 2. So we'll see if any of our tests hit this case after running through here. Yeah, see, nothing gets in here ever, which makes sense. Because if you passed all this up here, all the checks, this gauntlet of checks, then you got through. So this is only happens in the error case. If you don't have a file name, then we'll end up giving you an ID. And that's for a package payload. So in the case of an error, we will give it an ID. Yeah, so this clearly expects there to be an ID no matter what. Okay, fine. So even if you fail and you forgot to add a source or file name, we will give you an ID temporarily, even though it's not going to be the one that you'll ever get. Yeah, okay. All right. I see what that's doing. Although the parent ID is never really used then. So we do all the work to pass this thing, the parent ID. Although it probably already had it. Yeah. Oh, no, maybe. Ooh, maybe it didn't. I probably had to add that. So we could remove this, and knowing that this is always use it in an error case, because then it will never, it doesn't really matter. And if I do that, then that gets rid of the need to pass this here. And I think that means I don't need, please be gray. Stop highlighting it. Nope, still used. Oh yeah, still used. Okay, so I didn't save anything doing that then in the end. Wait, where is it used here? Oh, you're upset because I'm passing the ID. Oh, right, I took it out. So it's just the two places calling it. Get rid of this parent ID. Now, do I need parent ID here? Well, I probably already had it. Parent type. Parent ID, it's late though. Yeah, I mean. Pretty sure this. Here I am undoing the bits and pieces I did. I probably could just look in the diff and tell faster. Yeah, okay. That's the callers. There it is. Okay, that's where he's using it. That's great. All right. So this is pretty close. This feels pretty close. Need to go back and check a few things. Make sure that and this parent ID is never null. I guess it could be null in the error case. If it's null in the error case, we don't care. Because you're in an error case and generating an ID with this null is allowed, and it will be fine. Okay. It's another week. Did some work. I feel like we got it to a good spot, especially if we're not going to go through and add the whole the to-do. Let's see. To-do. Yes, this to-do. Go back to my code here. To-do. We have the Wix meeting tomorrow. Maybe I'll bring it up there. We can discuss how important we think this scenario is and if it's worth all the extra work in the back end. And we'll do that. So there's an invitation tomorrow morning at 9:30 PDT, Pacific time that is. If you want to join us, I'll be there. I think Sean will probably be there. Bob will probably join us. The three of us tend to go through and do a triage and then talk about other things. And that's it. So until then, I'm going to get back to coding. And so should you. See you in a week. Bye.